Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of Wicked. I'm so glad you guys could have joined me today for our reading. And if you happen to have missed it, that's totally fine too. But for future reference, I read every Monday from 8 to 9 ish Eastern Standard Time. So if you'd like to come by and watch me read live, that would be fantastic. But if not, if you happen to have missed any of my previous readings, do not fret. The playlist is already put together for you on my channel here on YouTube, as well as any of the other books that I have read so far. So if you've missed any of the previous readings of Wicked, or if you've missed any of the other books that I have actually read up to this point, please feel free to go back and check them out on my channel. They're all listed. There's no guesswork. You just find whichever book you want to listen to and start at the first one and just keep going from there. But for anyone who's just joining us, we have gotten pretty far into Wicked. So this is all we've got left, really. So not probably another 3 more reads, maybe. This has been a journey. This has been an absolute journey so far. If you have seen the show, the Broadway show, if you have seen the movie, the first movie, this book, even though those particular mediums are inspired by this, very different. So if you happen to see this, you see me, and you have kids, do not think that, like little kids, do not think that this is something that is for them. There are a lot of adult themes in this book. It's a lot darker than the show and the movie. So, not for little ears. um, Teenage ears, perhaps, not little ears. So you have been forewarned. And technically there aren't any real spoilers in this book in regards to the movie or the show. Um, because the way that they have sort of extrapolated a plot for the movie and the show, it's different. The focal points in this book are so much different than the focal point of the movie and the show. Because basically the kind of the vehicle that pushes the show and the movie forward is Elphaba overcoming, people having issues with her green skin and kind of vilifying her because she looks different and all that stuff. Honestly, in here, I've noticed so far during our time reading this, her skin color, obviously it's come up a little bit, but it has not been the focal point of this story in the way that it has been for the show and the movie. It's just not. So if you were thinking that you were going to get more like, oh, she really overcomes adversity because of her skin color in the book, no, no, no. Hello. How are you? Thanks for joining my live. So nice to see you. All right, so we typically start a little bit after 8, and I would say that we've probably gotten to that point now. But we are currently, let's see here, what chapter? Because the book is separated into, let's see, 1, 2, 3. We are in section 4, so of 5. 4 of 5. So again, we're almost done. We're kind of sort of almost done. About another 3 readings, I think. But here we go. We find ourselves in the Vincus. So part 4. Chapter 1. The Voyage Out. On the day the 7-year Mont was to leave, Sister Bursar took the huge iron key from her bosom and unlocked the store chamber, and said, "Come in." She pulled from the press 3 black shifts, 6 camisoles, gloves, and a shawl. She also handed over the broom. Finally, for emergencies, a basket of simples, herbs and roots, tinctures, rous, salves, and balms. There was paper, too, though not much, a dozen pages or so, in different shapes and thickness. Paper was in ever short supply in all of Oz. Make it last, make it important, advised Sister Bursar. You're a bright one, for all your sulks and silences. She found a pen, a phoenix feather, known for the endurance and strength of the quill. 3 pots of black ink, sealed under knobby wrist holds of wax. Otzi Manglehand was waiting in the ambulatory with the old Superior Mont. The convent was paying a decent penny for this service, and Otzi needed the fees. But she didn't like the look of the sullen Mont that Sister Bursar ushered in. This is your passenger, said the Superior Mont. Her name is Sister Saint Elphaba. She spent many years in solitary life and in nursing. The habit of gossip is lost, but it's time for her to move on, and move on she will. You'll find her no trouble. Otzi looked the passenger over and said, The Grass Trail train doesn't promise the survival of its party, Mother. I've led 24 trips these past 10 years or so, and there have been more casualties than I would like to admit. She leaves of her own free will, said the Superior Mont. Should she wish to return at any point, we would take her in. She is one of us. She didn't look like one of anything to Otzi, neither flesh nor fowl, neither idiot nor intellectual. Sister Saint Elphaba just stared at the floor. Though she seemed to be about 30, she had a sallow, adolescent look about her. And there's luggage. Can you manage it? The Superior Mont pointed to the small heap of supplies in the immaculate forecourt in the front of the Montry. Then she turned to the departing Mont. Sweet child of the unnamed God, said the Superior Mont, you go from us to conduct an exercise in expiation. You feel there is a penalty to pay before you may find peace. The unquestioning silence of the cloister is no longer what you need. You are returning to yourself. So we send you from us with our love and with our expectations of your success. Godspeed, my good sister. The passenger kept her eyes trained on the ground and did not answer. The Superior Mont sighed. We must be off to our devotions. She peeled a few notes from a roll of money kept in the recesses of her veils and handed them over to Otzi Manglehand. This should see you through, and more besides. It was a healthy amount. Hello, Mateo. Thanks for joining us. It was a healthy amount. Otzi stood to earn a lot from escorting this taciturn woman through the Kells, more than from the whole rest of her party combined. You are too good, Mother Mont, she said. She took the cash with her strong hand and made a gesture of deference with her limp one. No one is too good, said the Superior Mont, but nicely, and retired with surprising speed behind the cloister doors. Sister Bursar said, You're on your own now, Sister Elfie. May all the stars smile on your way. And then she disappeared as well. Otzi went to load the luggage and supplies in the wagon. There was a small, chunky ragamuffin boy asleep behind the trunk. Off with you, said Otzi, but the boy muttered, I'm to go too, that's what they told me. When Sister Saint Elphaba neither confirmed nor denied this plan, Otzi began to understand why the payment to take the green Mont away had been more than generous. The cloister of St. Glinda was located in the Shale Shallows, 12 hours southwest of the Emerald City. It was an outpost Montry under the aegis of the one in town. Sister Saint Elphaba had spent 2 years in town and 5 years here, according to the Mother Mont. You want to be called sister still, now that you're sprung from that holy prison? Asked Otzi as she clucked the reins and urged the pack horses on. Elfie is fine, said the passenger. And the boy? What's he called? Elfie shrugged. The coach met the rest of the caravan a few miles on. There were 4 wagons in all and 15 travelers. Elfie and the boy were the last to join. Otzi Manglehand outlined the proposed route, south along the edge of Kelswater, west through Cumbricia's Pass, northwest through the 1,000-year grasslands, stopping at Kyamoko, and then wintering a bit farther northwest. The Vinkus was uncivilized land, Otzi told them, and there were tribal groups to be wary of: the Unamata, the Skro, and the Arjiki. And there were animals and spirits. They would need to stick together. They would need to trust one another. Elfie showed no signs of listening. She fiddled with the phoenix feather and drew patterns in the soil between her feet, coiling shapes like dragons writhing or smoke rising. The boy squatted 8 or 10 feet away, wary and shuddered. He seemed to be her page, for he managed her bags and attended her needs, but they did not look at each other or speak. Otzi found it strange in the extreme, and hoped it didn't augur ill. The grass trail train set off at sunset, and made only a few miles before its first camp at a stream bed. The party, mostly Gilliganese, chattered in nervous amazement at their courage to go so far afield from the safety of Central Oz, all for different reasons: for business, for family needs, to pay a debt, to kill an enemy. The Vinkus was a frontier, and the Winkies a benighted, bloodthirsty folk who knew little about indoor plumbing or the rules of etiquette, so the party regaled itself in song. Otzi took part for a short time, but she knew there was hardly one among them who wouldn't prefer to stay where they were and avoid the depths of the Vinkus altogether. Except perhaps that Elfie, who was keeping pretty much to herself. They left the rich edge of Gilligan behind. The Vinkus began with a mesh of pebbles spread on brown, wet soil. At night the lizard star pointed the direction, south, south along the edge of the Great Kells, to the dangerous gap of Cumbricius Pass. Pines and black star saps stood up like teeth on every embankment. By day they were welcoming, sometimes giving shade. By night they towered and harbored snatch owls and bats. Elfie was often awake at night. Thought was returning to her, perhaps expanding under the fierce openness, where the birds cried in falling voices, and the meteors stitched omens into the sky. Sometimes she tried to write with her phoenix feather. Sometimes she sat and thought words out, and didn't commit them to paper. Life outside the cloister seemed to cloud up with such particularity. The shape of her 7 years past was already being crowded out. All the undifferentiated time, washing terracotta floors without dipping her hands in the bucket. It took hours to do a single room, but no floor was ever cleaner. Making wine, taking in the sick, working in the infirmary wing, which had reminded her briefly of Crage Hall. The benefit of a uniform was that one need not struggle to be unique. How many uniquenesses could the unnamed god or nature create? One could sink selflessly into the daily pattern. One could find one's way without groping. The little changes, the red bird landing on the windowsill, and that was spring. The leaves to rake from the terrace, and that was fall. They were enough. 3 years of absolute silence, 2 years of whisper, and then, moved up and outward by the decision of the Superior Mont, 2 years on the ward for incurables. There, for 9 months, thought Elfie under the stars, picturing it to herself as if telling someone else, she tended the dying, and those too clumsy to die. She grew to see dying as a pattern, beautiful in its way. A human form is like a leaf. It dies in a set piece, unless something interferes. First this, then that, then this. She might have gone on as a nurse forever, arranging wrists in a pleasing pattern above starched bed sheets, reading the nonsense words of scripture that seemed to help so. She could manage the dying. Then, a year ago, pale invalid Tibbet was carted to the home for the incurables. He wasn't too far gone to recognize her, even behind her veil and silences. Weak, unable to shit or piss without help, his skin falling in rags and parchment. He was better at life than she was. He selfishly required that she be an individual, and he addressed her by her name. He joked, he remembered stories, he criticized old friends for abandoning him. He noticed the differences in how she moved from day to day, how she thought. He reminded her that she did think. Under the scrutiny of his tired frame, she was recreated, against her will, as an individual, or nearly. At last he died, and the Superior Mont had said that it was time for her to go and atone for her mistakes, though not even the Superior Mont knew what they were. When when that was done, well, she was still a young woman. She could raise a family, take her broom and remember obedience and mystery. You can't sleep, said Otzi one night as Elfie sat under the stars. But though her thoughts were rich and complicated, her words were poor, and she merely grunted. Otzi made a few jokes at which Elfie tried to smile, but Otzi laughed enough for both of them. Big, full laughs. It made Elfie tired. Isn't that cook a piece of work? Said Otzi, and told some episode that seemed pointless, and she chortled at her own story. Elfie tried to enjoy, tried to grin, but above her the stars grew thicker, more like glittering fish spawn than salt. They turned on their stalks with a cursing, grinding sound, if only she could hear it. She couldn't hear it. Otzi was too coarse and loud. There was much to hate in this world, and too much to love. Before long they came to the edge of Kelswater, a murderous slice of water lying as if cleft from the side of a thundercloud. It was all gray, no lights on it. That, said Otzi, is why the horses don't drink from it, nor travelers. That's why it was never tapped in aqueducts and run to the Emerald City. It's dead water, and you thought you'd seen it all. Still, the travelers were impressed. A lavender heaviness arose on its western edge, the first hint of the great Kells, the mountains that separated the Vinkus from the rest of Oz. From here, the mountains appeared as thin as gas. Otzi demonstrated the use of the fog charm in the event of an attack by a band of Unamata hunters. Are we going to be attacked? Asked the boy who seemed to be Elfie's page. I'll get 'em dead before no one knows what's on. The fear rose up from him and caught in on the others. We usually do well, said Otzi. We just need to be prepared. They can be friends, if we are friends. The caravan straggled by day, 4 wagons keeping their distance, accompanied by 9 horses, 2 cows, a bull, a heifer, and various chickens without much personality. The cook had a dog named Killjoy, who seemed to Elfie a make-joy instead, a panting, sniffy thing. Some people thought for a time he might actually be a dog in hiding, but they gave up that idea. Ha! Elfie said to the others. Have you spoken to animals so seldom that you can't remember the difference any more? No, he was just a dog, but a most glorious doggy dog, full of rages and exaggerated devotions. Killjoy was a mountain breed, part Leinster Collie, part Lanks Terrier, and maybe part wolf. His nose went up like a butter curl, in gray-black ridges and ribs. He could not be kept from hunting, but he did not catch much either. By night, when the wagons squared off together, the cooking fire within, the animals just nearby, without, and the singing began at last, Killjoy hid under the wagon. Otzi heard the boy tell the dog his name. I'm Lear, said the boy. You can be my dog, sort of. She had to smile. The fat child was not good at making friends, and a lonely child should have a dog. Kelswater slipped back, out of sight. Some felt safer away from it. Almost hourly the great Kells rose and thickened, the color now like the brown rind of a butterdew melon. Still the track meandered along the valley, the Vinkus River on its right, the mountains beyond it. Otzi knew several places to ford, but they weren't clearly marked. While they searched, Killjoy caught a valley grite at last. He bled and whined, and was treated for poison. Lear let him ride in his arms, which made Elfie faintly jealous. She was almost amused to note in herself such a turgid, old-fashioned feeling as jealousy. The cook was angry that Killjoy preferred someone else's company more than his. He shook his ladle overhead as if summoning the wrath of angel chefs among the stars. Elfie thought of him as a butcher cook, as he seemed to have no scruples about shooting rabbits and eating them. "How do you know they're not rabbits?" she said, and wouldn't touch a bite. "Quiet, you, or I'll cook that little boy instead," he answered. She tried to raise with Otzi the notion of firing the cook, but Otzi would not listen. "We're coming into Cumbricia's Pass," she said. "My mind is on other matters." They couldn't help but feel the unsettling eroticism of the landscape. From the eastern approach, the Cumbricia Pass looked like a woman lying on her back, her legs spread apart, welcoming them. Up in the slopes, the pine boughs shaded the sun. The wild pears tangled their twisted branches together as if wrestling. A sudden dampness, a new private climate. The bark ran wet. The air sank heavily against the skin like half-laundered toweling. Once inside the forest, the travelers could not see the hills. Everything smelled of ferns and fiddle greens. And on the shores of a small lake stood a dead tree. It harbored a community of bees at their work of chamber music and honey. "I want to take them with us," said Elfie. "I'll talk to them and see if they'll come." There had been bees in the kitchen garden at Crage Hall, and again at the cloister of St. Glinda in the Shale Shallows. Elfie was entranced by them, but Lear was terrified, and the cook threatened to disappear and leave the group traumatized by an inability to do a really top-notch bechamel sauce in the wilderness. Discussion was waged. An old man in the party, heading westward to die because of some midnight vision, ventured as to how a little honey would improve the tasteless sparrow-leaf tea. A Glicken mail-order bride agreed. Otzi, of sentimental enthusiasms when least expected, voted for honey. So Elfie climbed the tree and talked to the bees, and they came along in a swarm. But most travelers stayed in the other wagons, suddenly scared of every fleck of dust that flitted against the skin. They sent out a request, using drums and mist to attract the attention of a hired Rafiki, for caravans were not allowed to move through the lands of different Vinkus tribes without a guide to negotiate permissions and fees. Bored one evening and responding to the gloom, the travelers fell to discussing the legend of the Cumbric Witch. Who comes first, the fairy queen Lurline or the Cumbric Witch? Ego, the sick old man, quoted the Oziad and reminded them all of how creation worked. The dragon of time created the sun and the moon, and Lurline cursed them and said that their children wouldn't know their own parents. And then the Cumbric Witch came along and flooded, and the flood and the battle, the spilling of evil in the world. Otzi Manglehand disagreed. She said, "You old fools, the Oziad is just a frilly romantic poem of older, harsher legends. What lives in folk memory is truer than how some artsy poet says it. In folk memory, evil always predates good." "Can this be true?" asked Ego with interest. "Surely there is the handful of nursery Martian that start, 'Once in the middle of a forest lived an old witch,' or 'The devil was out walking one day and met a child,'" said Otzi, who was showing that she had some education as well as grit. "To the grim poor there need be no pourquoi tale about where evil arises. It just arises. It always is. One never learns how the witch became wicked, or whether that was the right choice for her. Is it ever the right choice? Does the devil ever struggle to be good again? Or, if so, is he not a devil? It is at the very least a question of definitions." "It certainly is true that tales of the Cumbric Witch abound," agreed Ego. "Every other witch is just a shadow, a daughter, a sister, a decadent descendant. The Cumbric Witch is the model further back than which it seems impossible to go." Elfie remembered the ambiguous scroll painting of the Cumbric Witch. Was it she? Found in the library of Three Queens, that summer long ago, standing in shiny shoes, straddling a continent, nursing or choking a beast. "I don't believe in the Cumbric Witch, even in Cumbricia's Pass," boasted the cook. "You don't believe in rabbits either," snarled Elfie, suddenly annoyed. "The question is, does the Cumbric Witch believe in you?" "Temper!" sang out Otzi, and turned it into a sing-along song. Elfie stamped away. This was too much like her childhood, discussing with her father and Nessa Rose about where evil begins, as if one could ever know. Her father used to orchestrate proofs about evil as a way of persuading his flock to convert. Elfie had come to think, back in Shiz, that as women wore cologne, men wore proofs to secure their own sense of themselves and thus to be attractive. But surely evil was beyond proof, just as the Cumbric witch was beyond the grasp of knowable history. Such weighty musings. Hi, Johnny. Thanks for joining us. Chapter 2. The Rafiki arrived, a thin, balding man with battle scars. There might be trouble from the Unamata this year, he told them. The caravan comes after a season of dirty forays by cavalry from the Emerald City. Winky roundup, he complained. It wasn't clear if he was talking about a local argument over a drunken slight to a Vinkus maiden, or about a slave trade and resettlement camps. The camp was broken, the lake left behind, and the silent forest continued for half a day. Sunlight speared through the canopy from time to time, but it was a thin, egg yolk light, and seemed always to be off to the side, never spotlighting down on the path ahead. It was eerie, as if Combricia herself were moving along beside them, hidden, unbidden, passing from tree to tree, sliding behind rocks, waiting in shadowy depths, watching and listening. The ailing old man wailed nasally and prayed to emerge from this mystery wood before he died, or his spirit might never find its way out. The boy wept like a girl. The cook wrung the neck of a chicken. Even the bees stopped humming. In the middle of the night, the cook disappeared. There was consternation among all except Elfie, who didn't care. Was it a kidnapping? Or a sleepwalking episode? Or suicide? Were the angry Unamata near and watching? Was it Combricia herself taking revenge on them for discussing her so glibly? There were many opinions, and the breakfast eggs were runny and inedible. Killjoy did not notice the cook's disappearance. He snuggled, grinning in his coma sleep, closer to Lear. The bees went into some sort of mysterious hibernation inside the joint of tree trunk brought along to make them happy. Killjoy, still smarting from gripe poison, slept 22 hours a day. The travelers, afraid of being overheard, stopped talking altogether. Toward the evening the pines at last began to thin, and the forest to shift to staghead oak, which with its broader branches let in more of the sky. A pasty yellow sky, but at last a sky, and then there was a cliff edge. They had climbed higher than anyone had quite realized. Beneath and beyond stretched the rest of Combricia's Pass, a journey of 4 or 5 days. Beyond that was the beginning of the 1,000-year grasslands. No one was sorry for the light and room that the sky afforded. Even Elfie felt her heart lift unexpectedly. In the middle of the night, the Unamata arrived. They brought gifts of dried fruit and sang tribal songs, and made those who would dance get up and dance. The travelers were more terrified of their hospitality than of the attack that they had expected. As Elfie thought about it, the Unamata seemed soft, compliant folk, only as fearful and fearless as schoolgirls. At least that was all they showed. They were cavorting, opinionated. They reminded her of the Quadlings with whom she had grown up. Perhaps ethnically they were distant cousins. Long lashes, narrow elbows, baby-like supple wrists, oblong heads, and thin, concentrated lips. Even with their foreign tongue, they made her feel at home. The Unamata left in the morning, complaining rudely about the runniness of the breakfast eggs. The Rafiki said that the Unamata would make no further trouble. Even he seemed disappointed, as if his employment hadn't been required. There was no more word about the cook. The Unamata didn't seem to know anything about him. As the caravan continued its descent, the sky opened up again, brisk and autumnal, wide as remorse. From there to there, the eye could hardly take it in. The plain below, compared to the mountains, seemed level as a lake. The wind made strokes across it, as if spelling things in a language of curls and stripes. No wild life was visible from this distance, though there were tribal fires here and there. Cumbricia's pass was left behind, or nearly. Then a Unamata messenger came on swift, leathery feet, arriving from the pass behind them, to share the news that a body had been found at the base of a cliff. Perhaps it was the cook. It was thought to be a man, but the surface of the corpse was so swollen with lesions that the particulars were lost. "It was the bees," said someone, full of rage. "Oh, was it?" came Elfie's calm voice. "They've been asleep for so long. Wouldn't there have been screams if they had attacked a man in the middle of the night? Did the bees sting his throat first, to swell his vocal cords shut? Very talented bees, those." "It was the bees," was the mutter, and the implication was clear. "You, too." Sorry about that. "Oh, I forgot the size of the human imagination," Elfie said meanly. "How very large it is, after all." But she wasn't upset. Not really, for Killjoy was back to himself at last, and the bees woke up too. Perhaps the high altitudes at the top of the Cumbricia Pass had given them much sleep. Elfie began to prefer their company to the rest of the travelers. As they woke up, coming down from the heights, she felt herself more and more awake too. The Rafiki pointed out in the horizon several mounting coils of smoke. At first the travelers guessed they were windstorms, but Otzi soothed them and alarmed them. It was evening fires for a large encampment. Scrow. It was autumn hunting season, though nothing had been seen of any game bigger than a hare or a grass fox. Its brush a wild swipe of bronze on melting golden meadow, its feet in black stockings, like a serving maid's. Killjoy was ecstatic with the possibilities of encounter. He could hardly bear to rest at night. Even in his dreams, he twitched with the hunt. The travelers feared the Scrow more than they had the Unamata. The Rafiki did not say much to allay their fears. He was more tentative than it had first seemed. Perhaps the job of negotiating among suspicious peoples required caution. Lear idolized him hopelessly. After only a few days of travel, Elfie thought, such silly things, children, and so embarrassing, because they keep changing themselves out of shame, out of a need to be loved or something, while animals are born who they are, accept it, and that is that. They live with greater peace than people do. She felt in herself a jolt of pleasurable expectation over the thought of approaching the Scrow. Along with so much else, she had forgotten what pleasurable expectation was. As night fell, everyone seemed more alert, out of fear and excitement. The skies throbbed with turquoise, even at midnight. Starlight and comet trails burned the tips of endless grass below into a hammered silver, like thousands of tapers in the chapel, just blown out, but still glowing. If one could drown in the grass, thought Elfie, it might be the best way to die. Chapter 3. It was noon when the caravan pulled up to the edge of the Scrow camp. A committee of Scrow had ridden to their domestic margin, where the sand-colored tents petered out into untrampled grass. Men and women alike sat on horseback, about 7 or 8 of them, in blue ribbons and ivory bangles. Also, obviously senior, was a huge slab of an old woman carried on a plannikin of some sort, its frame all hung round with tambours and clinking amulets and gauzy veils. She let the Rafiki and the tribal paladins trade compliments or insults. After a while she grunted a direction, and her curtains were withdrawn so she could see. She had an overhung lip, so large that it doubled back on itself like an upside-down spout on a pitcher. Her eyes were ringed with kohl. On her shoulders sat 2 dyspeptic-looking crows. Their feet were shackled in gold links and attached to loops in her ornamental collar, into which the old woman had dribbled traces of the fruit she had been eating as she waited. Her shoulders were speckled with crow droppings. The Princess Nastoya, said the Rafiki at last. She was the filthiest, least educated princess anyone had ever seen. Yet she had some dignity. Even the most ardent democrat among the travelers genuflected. She laughed raucously. Then she bade her bearers lug her away to some place less tedious. The Scrow camp was arranged in concentric circles, with the princess's tent in the middle, prettied up with extensions of faded striped baldaquins on all sides. It was a little airy palace in silks and cotton muslin. Her advisers and concubine husbands seemed to live in the nearest circle. And a scrawny lot the husbands were, thought Elfie, but perhaps they were chosen for timidity and scrawniness, to make her seem ever the larger. Beyond the princess's settlement ranged 400 tents, which meant maybe 1,000 people altogether. 1,000 humans, with their poached salmon skin, their moistly protruding eyes, but sensitive in lowered gazes to avoid being met, their handsome, generous noses, and big buttocks, and wide rolling hips, men and women alike. Most of the caravan travelers stayed glued to the doors of their wagons, imagining crime just beyond the nearest tent. But Elfie found it impossible to keep still, with all this newness beckoning. When Elfie walked, there were gasps, and the adults shyly retreated out of her path. But only 10 minutes had passed before there were 60 children in a noisy crowd, following behind, running ahead, like a cloud of midges. The Rafiki advised caution, advised return to the camp, but childhood in the Quadling Badlands had made Elphaba not only bold, but curious. There were more ways to live than the ones given by one's superiors. After the evening meal, a delegation of erect old Scrow dignitaries approached the grass trail train and entered into a lengthy palaver with the Rafiki. In the end, the Rafiki translated the message. A small band was invited, requested, ordered, to the Scrow shrine. It would take an hour by camel. For her sin of skin color, presumably, or possibly for having had the nerve to take a solitary stroll through the Scrow tent city, Elfie was told to join Otzi, the Rafiki, Ego for his venerable age, and one of the financial adventurers, named Pitchweed, or maybe that was just a nasty nickname. By the light of sallow wood torches, the camels, in glittering comparisons, lurched and lumbered on a worn track. It was like going up and down a staircase at the same time. Elfie sat above the grass, a vantage point over the great flickering surface. Although the ocean was only an idea sprung out of mythology, she could almost see where it came from. There were small grass hawks launching themselves like fish leaping out of the spume, nippling at the fireflies, pocketing them, then falling back in a dry splash. Bats passed, making a guttering, sputtering sound that ended in an extinguishing swoop. The plain itself seemed to bring forth night color, now a heliotrope, now a bronzy green, now a dune color skeened through with red and silver. The moon rose, an opalescent goddess tipping light from her harsh maternal scimitar. Nothing more need have happened. It seemed enough to Elphaba to find herself capable of such a weird, ecstatic response to soft color and safe space. But no, on, on. Eventually, Elfie noticed a plantation of trees, carefully tended in this devastating openness. First a stand of scrub spruce, contorted by the winds into gnarled figures of split bark and hissing needles, and the pagan odor of sap. Beyond, a rise of higher hedges, then yet higher trees. It was the circular pattern of the Scrow encampment again. The party passed into it in silence, as through a maze, along curving corridors of whispering brush, moving from outer to inner circles lit by oil lamps, hammered to carven posts. Within, at the center, was the Princess Nastoya, girded in a native costume of leather and grass made all the more effective by a length of striped purple and white toweling she must have bargained from some traveler or another. She stood, distracted and breathing heavily, leaning on stout walking sticks around her. Sarsen stones, like gapped teeth, resembled a stone cage, through which she could hardly pass, given her bulk. The guests joined the hosts in eating, drinking, and smoking on a pipe with a bowl carved like a crow's head. Crows ranged all around on the tops of the sarsens. 20, 30, 40? Elfie's head spun. The moon rose. The plain at night, invisible from the secret garden of the green maze, wheeled about like a child's top. She could almost hear the spinning. The Scrow elders chanted in a drone. When the drone died out, the Princess Nastoya raised her head. The huge wattles of old flesh beneath her chin wobbled. Her toweling fell to the ground. She was naked and old and strong. What had seemed like boredom was revealed as patience, memory, control. She shook the very hair off her head, and it uncoiled down her back and disappeared. Her feet moved massively, as if seeking the best purchase, like columns, like pillars of stone. She dropped her arms forward, and her back was a dome. Still her head was up, her eyes the brighter, her nose working mightily. She was an elephant. An elephant goddess, Elfie thought, her mind recoiling in terror and delight. But the Princess Nastoya said, "No." She spoke through the Rafiki still. He had obviously seen this before, though with the alcohol he stuttered and had to search for words. One by one, she asked the intentions of the travelers. "Money and commerce," said Pinchweed, shocked into honesty. "Money and commerce and pillage and plunder at whatever the cost." "A place to die where I can rest, and my spirit go abroad," ventured Ego. "Safety and movement out of harm's way," said Otzi spunkily, by which it was clear she meant out of men's way. The Rafiki indicated that Elfie's own answer was still needed. In the presence of such an animal, Elfie could not stay aloof, so she spoke it as best she could. "To retire from the world after making sure the safety of the survivors of my lover, to face his widow, Sarima, in guilt and responsibility, and then to remove myself from the darkening world." The elephant told the others, except the Rafiki, to leave. The elephant raised her trunk and sniffed the wind. Her rheumy old eyes blinked slowly, and her ears moved back and forth, raking the air for nuance. She pissed hugely in a steaming flow, with dignity and nonchalance, eyes firmly latched on Elphaba. Through the Rafiki, the elephant then said, "Daughter of the dragon, I too am under a spell. I know how it may be broken, but I choose to live as a changeling. An elephant is a hunted thing in these times. The Scrow approve of me. They have worshipped elephants from the time before language, the time before history began. They know I am not a goddess. They know I am a beast who chooses magical incarceration as a human over the dangerous liberty of my own powerful form. When the times are a crucible, when the air is full of crisis," she said, "those who are the most themselves are the victims." Elfie could only look. She could not speak. "But the choice to save yourself can itself be deadly," said the Princess Nastoya. Elfie nodded, looked away, and looked back. "I will give you 3 crows as your familiars," said the princess. "You are in hiding as a witch now. That is your guise." She spoke a word to the crows, and 3 mangy, evil-looking things came and waited nearby. "A witch?" Elphaba said. What would her father think? "Hiding from what?" "We have the same enemy," replied the princess. "We are both at risk. If you need help, send the crows. If I am alive, as an old matriarch monarch, or as a free elephant, I'll come to your aid." "Why?" asked Elfie. "Because no retreat from the world can mask what is in your face," she answered. The princess said more. It had been years, more than a decade, since Elfie had been able to talk to an animal who, Elfie asked the princess had enchanted her, but the Princess Nastoya wouldn't say, in part as self-protection, for the death of the enchanter could sometimes mean the revocation of binding spells, and her curse was her safety. But is life worth living in the wrong form? Said Elfie. The interior doesn't change, she answered, except by self-involvement, of which be not afraid, and also beware. I have no interior, said Elphaba. Something told those bees to kill the cook, said the Princess Nastoya, with a glitter in her eye. Elphaba felt herself go pale. I didn't, she said. No, it couldn't have been me. And how did you know? You did, on some level. You are a strong woman, and I can hear bees, you know. My ears are keen. I would like to stay here with you, said Elphaba. Life has been very hard. If you can hear me when I cannot hear myself, something the superior Mont could never do, you could help me do no harm in this world. That's all I want, to do no harm. By your own admission, you have a job to do, said the princess. She curled her trunk around Elphaba's face, feeling its contours and truths. Go and do it. May I return to you? Asked Elfie. But the princess wouldn't answer. She was tiring. She was an old thing, even for an elephant. Her trunk went back and forth like a pendulum on a clock. Then the great nose hand came forward and set itself with wonderful weight and precision on Elphaba's shoulders, and curled a bit around her neck. Listen to me, sister, she said. Remember this. Nothing is written in the stars. Not these stars, nor any others. No one controls your destiny. Elphaba could not answer. So shocked was she at the touch. She backed away when dismissed, her mind all but out of her. Then the return on camels across the shuddering colors of night grass, hypnotic, vague, and distressing. Yet there was blessing in this night. Elphaba had forgotten blessing too, like so much else. Chapter 4. They left the Skrow encampment and the Princess Nastoya behind. The grass trail train moved in a circle north, now a wide arch. Ego died and was buried in a sandy mound. Give his spirit movement and flight, said Elfie at the ceremony. The Rafiki admitted later that he had thought one of the guests of the command meeting with the Princess Nastoya was to be sacrificed in a ritual slaughter. It had happened before. The princess, though coping with her dilemma, was not above a sense of revenge. It was the honesty of Pinchweed that saved him, as he was the obvious choice. Or perhaps ego bore the prospect of his death closer to the surface than humans could see, and the elephant took pity. The crows were annoying. They pestered the bees, shat all over the wagon, and teased Killjoy. The Glicken, Rariani stopped at a The Glicken, this name is hard to say. Rarani stopped at a well, met her isolated widower husband-to-be, and left the grass trail train. The toothless new husband already had 6 motherless children, and they took to Rayrani like orphaned ducklings behind a farm dog. There were only 10 travelers left. Now we're entering Arjiki tribal lands, said the Rafiki. The first Arjiki band approached a few days later. They wore nothing so splendid as what Fiyero had worn, in the way of blue markings. These were nomads, shepherds, rounding up the sheep from the western foothills of the Great Kells for their annual counting and, it seemed, sale to the east. Still, just the handsome look of them ripped Elfie's heart into pieces. Their wildness, their otherness. This may be a punishment to the hour of my death, she thought. The grass trail train, what by now was down to only 2 wagons. In one, the Rafiki, Otzi, Lear the boy, Pinchweed the entrepreneur, and a Gillicanese mechanic named Caup. In the other, Elfie herself, and the bees, the crows, and Killjoy. Already she had, it seemed, been accepted as a witch. It was not an entirely unlikable disguise. Kiamo Ko was just a week away. The grass trail train turned eastward, into the steel gray passes of the steep Great Kells. Winter was almost here, and the last travelers were grateful that the snows had held off. Otzi intended to stop the winter in an Arjiki camp some 20 miles on. In the spring, she would head back to the Emerald City, making the northern route through Oogaboo and the Pertha Hills of Gillican. Elfie thought of sending a note to Glinda if after all these years she was still there, but being unable to decide yes, she decided no. "Tomorrow," said Otzi, "we'll see Kiamo Ko, the mountain stronghold of the ruling clan of the Arjikis. Are you ready, Sister Elfie?" She was teasing, and Elfie didn't like it. "I am no longer his sister. I am a witch," she said, and tried to think poisonous thoughts at Otzi. But Otzi was a stronger person than the cook, apparently, for she just laughed and went on her way. The grass trail train stopped on the side of a small tarn. The others said its water was refreshing, though icy cold. Elfie didn't know or care about that. But in the middle was an island, a tiny thing, the size of a mattress, sprouting one leafless tree like an umbrella that had lost its fabric. Before Elphaba could quite make it out, the evening light came early at this time of year, and even earlier in the mountains. Killjoy had plunged feverishly into the water, and splashed and swum his way to the island, intent on some small movement or interesting scent he had picked up. He ferreted in the sedge, and then clamped his teeth, the most wolf-like of his features, gently around the skull of a small beast in the grass. Elfie couldn't see, but it looked like a baby. Otzi screamed. Lear quivered like a blob of jelly. Killjoy released his grip, but only to get a further hold. He was drooling over the scalp of the thing he had caught. There was no way to go through the water. That would be death. But her feet went out anyway. They hit the water hard. The water hit hard back. The water turned to ice as she ran, foot by foot of ice under foot by foot of hurry. A silvering plate formed instantly, cantilevering forward, making a cold, safe bridge to the island, where Killjoy could be scolded, and the baby saved, though she hadn't dared hope she could be in time. She pried Killjoy's jaws apart and scooped up the thing. It shivered in terror and the cold. Its bright black eyes were alert and watching, ready to upbraid or condemn or love, same as any capable adult thing. The others were surprised to see it, as surprised as they had been to see the ice form, perhaps by some magic spell left on the tarn from some passing wizard or witch. It was a small monkey, of the variety called the snow monkey, a baby abandoned by its mother and its tribe, or maybe separated by accident. It didn't think much of Killjoy, but it liked the warmth of the wagon. They pitched their camp halfway up the perilous slope to Kiamo Ko. The castle rose in steep black angles out of black rock. Elfie could see it perched above them like an eagle with folded wings. Its conical roofed towers, its battlements and bartizans, its portcullis and arrow-slit windows, they all belied its original intention as the head of a waterworks. Below it wound a powerful tributary of the Vincus River, on which the Ozma regent once had meant to build a dam and channel water into the center of Oz. Back when the droughts were their most threatening, Fiero's father had taken this stronghold by siege and storm and made it the seat of the Arjiki princes, before dying and leaving the clan leadership to his only son, if Elphaba remembered rightly. The small luggage was packed, the bees hummed, their melodies ever more amusing as she listened, week by week. Killjoy was still sulking over being denied the kill. The crows sensed that a change was coming and wouldn't eat dinner. The monkey, who was called Chistery because of the sound he made, chittered and chattered now that he was warm and safe. Around the campfire goodbyes were spoken, a few toasts, even a few regrets. The sky was blacker than it had been before. Perhaps it was the contrast of the whiteness of snowy peaks all around. Lear showed up with a parcel of clothing and some sort of musical instrument, and said goodbyes too. "Oh, so you're stopping here, are you?" said Elfie. "Yes," he said, "with you." "With the crows, with the monkey, with the bees, with the dog, and with the witch," she said. "With me." "Where else can I go?" he asked. "I'm sure I don't know," she answered. "I can take care of the dog," he said calmly. "I can collect the honey for you." "Makes no difference to me," she said. "All right," he said, and so Lear prepared to enter his father's house. All right. We will call that a close for the evening. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me this evening and letting me read to you. It is one of the highlights of my week. So same time next week, 8 to 9 maybe, Eastern Standard Time, in case anyone wants to know. Eastern Standard Time, 8 to 9 o'clock. And yeah, come catch me live. But if you can't, you'll see this video anyway later. So I hope you guys have a fantastic week. I hope you enjoyed the nice weather that most of us are supposed to get over here on the East Coast this week. Until then, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves hydrated, and I will see you next week. Bye.